Hola, un saludo especial desde la revista Ícala, a quienes nos acompañan en el panel En otras palabras del día de hoy. Nos alegra mucho encontrarnos en este espacio, un espacio para la difusión del conocimiento. Y la idea del día de hoy es justamente socializar algunos trabajos de nuestro número temático Políticas y Prácticas para un Multilingüismo Global, número 29.3, que salió en septiembre de 2024. Yo soy Luanda Cito, editora de la revista, y hoy nuestro objetivo es proporcionar este foro académico para el debate informado, respetuoso, sobre temas actuales relacionados con el lenguaje, la cultura, la lingüística, la literatura, la traducción, la enseñanza. Estos son los objetivos realmente de nuestra revista, que tiene un nombre indígena, lengua Tule, y que la significa tema, camino o asuntos de gran importancia. Esto para nosotros es también multilingüe. Esta edición es un trabajo compartido, ¿no? Es un número especial que nace del trabajo conjunto de la revista Ícala y la Cátedra UNESCO sobre políticas lingüísticas para el multilingüismo, liderada por profesor Gilbert Miller desde la Universidad Federal de Santa Catarina y colegas de todo el mundo. En esta edición especial tuvimos el honor de contar con la colaboración del propio profesor Gilbert Miller, la profesora Umarani Papsuami y la profesora Marta Pulido, de nuestra universidad, como editores invitados. Entonces ya, para seguir, para este segundo panel, la temática son las políticas lingüísticas de la educación superior en Colombia y temas de multilingüismo. Y entonces damos la bienvenida a nuestro equipo invitado, editores y editoras, quienes moderarán la conversación el día de hoy. Agradezco a todos ustedes que nos acompañan, al equipo de SETI por la interpretación y a quienes participan de este espacio. Espero que les encante la conversación de hoy. Y Marta, te paso la palabra. Muchas gracias a uno de ustedes.
Okay, thank you very much, Luanda, and I do appreciate the presence of everybody. Thanks to my colleagues Gilvana and Umarani, and thanks to the authors who had the generosity to be here, and to the readers of your articles, Juan Jose Marin and Yeo Ngana. Everyone is from different parts of the world. I'm going to give the word to Umarani, because she's going to talk very briefly about the general topics in the issue, in case you have some technical problems, Umarani. So you have.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, good evening to everybody, ladies and gentlemen, my dear colleagues, and our beloved contributors. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to be part of this panel, especially to talk more about the volume titled Policies and Practices in Global Multilingualism, published in Ikala. I liked the meaning of Ikala, which is coming from a language, Kuna language, which means theme or path. It's a beautiful meaning. Very happy that we were part of this. I thank Martha Lucida and Luanda Sito, Jilwan, for giving us this opportunity. This volume, as you might have already noticed, so many months have passed, but still it inspires a lot of people. It's not just a mere collection of papers, in my opinion. It is indeed a very bold exploration into the evolving complexities of multilingualism, because we are nowadays facing the impact or the influence of artificial intelligence in all aspects, and we need to negotiate the balance between the emerging technologies, globalizations, multilingualism, and the local linguistic realities, which are very, very different. That is why when the Kala editors approached us, we were very happy that we will be focusing mainly on the global south. The contributions address crucial topics. They include language education, language policies, linguistic rights, intercultural mediation, translation, and accessibility. We also have some articles exploring literary studies, um, and the expanding role of technology also, mainly in promoting linguistic diversity. Okay, you might ask what distinguishes this volume from the rest of it. The main focus, the concentration is on the multilingual realities of the global south, which are frequently marginalized in global conversations about language. By foregrounding these perspectives, our collection certainly sheds light on the multifaceted challenges and opportunities faced by multilingual societies. The works that featured in this volume, as I already told you, like we have mainly when we talk about language education, we have an article fostering equity and access across diverse community. We also have language policies related articles which shape access, representation, and identity in post colonial and globalized contexts. There is also an article that focuses on linguistic rights, advocating for the inclusion and preservation of indigenous minority languages. Intercultural mediation, translation accessibility, literary studies, all of this aid in promoting linguistic diversity. We are very proud to say that we have tried to cover articles from several countries: South Africa, China, Colombia, Romania, Brazil. We also have the Trinidad and Tobago and the Philippines. All these examples highlight the diversity of the regions represented in the volume, particularly from the global south. I would like to extend our gratitude to all the contributors. I'm very happy that we are going to be in the panel with three of the contributors, my fellow editors, and also, of course, the entire Ikala team. The volume is really impressive. Like you can see, I even printed out the volume, such a thick volume running over more than 350 pages. So here I'm very happy that we have with us Anthony. He's from the UK, and it is a pleasure meeting you, and Miranda and the other colleagues, Julio, of course. So we have three of them going to present their works, and we welcome you to our panel. Thank you for giving me these opportunities to open up the panel.
Thank you very much, Umarani. So before giving the floor to Gilban, I'm just going to comment about the readers. I'm going to begin with the third one, which is Julio Jatova's text. He will be talking with Gilban, so Gilban is known already. And the second one is Anthony Hoyte West's article, and he will be talking with Yeo Gana. Now, Yeo has a PhD from Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina in Brazil. He has published also articles in Cadernos de Tradução, and now he is a professor at the Department of Latin American Studies at Université Félix Houphouët-Boigny in Ivory Coast, and he's the CEO of Linguistic Services Enterprise. And Juan Jose Marin, who is going to be accompanying our colleague and the director of the School of Languages, Jaime Usma, and Norbelia Miranda. Juan Jose Miranda has just finished his BA in translation at the University of Antioquia. He had been a brilliant student, and I'm very glad he accepted this invitation. So Gilban, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Marta. Muchas gracias. Bom dia a todos e a todas. I would like to begin with my thanks to the ICALA for the invitation to our UNESCO Chair on Language Policies for Multilingualism to collaborate in organizing this number. And my thanks are for all authors that submitted articles. As Uma stressed, we had a really beautiful set of contributions from so many countries in so many languages. It's the sense and the spirit of our work at the UNESCO Chair. And I would like to call the first presentation. We are going to have 10 minutes for the presentation and 10 more minutes for the debate. And the first text will be presented by Professor Norbelia Miranda from the Universidad del Valle. So I give you the floor, Professor Norbelia.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this wonderful invitation, not only to be here in the panel to share the article, but also for building this special issue in ICALA. So let me share my screen, where I have some notes. Okay. So I guess you can see my screen now. The title of our article is this. First, I'd like to say that our slides will be in Spanish, but I will be using English for most part. I will be translating a little bit. So this is the title of our article, Políticas y Prácticas Multilingües en la Educación Superior, una exploración a nivel nacional en Colombia. Policies and Practices, multilingual policies and practices in higher education in Colombia, an exploration nation at the nation. And I have to say that Jaime, Usma, and I will be sharing the article, but this was made by a team with Sandra Jimena Bonilla Medina, Carmelina Encarnación, Ederson Silva, and Ligia Martinez. So we are all from different universities, both public and private. So this is what we'll be sharing. First of all, the origin of our work, and then the main research question that we answer in this article, then the design of the research, some findings, and then we will move to some conclusions. So first of all, I have to say that we started thinking of policies and practices within our Red Polidiversa. This is a network of 16 universities across Colombia, both public and private in different regions, as you can see in the map, that we are all concerned about the policies that we have in our country, the actions that we do in our institutions that sometimes hide the different ethnicities, different cultural differences that we have in our universities. So we got together as a team in 2019, and we have been working since then in different projects and different activities. So this was born in this Red Polidiversa network. So now the question that we addressed in our article was this. So to what extent, we wanted to know to what extent our institutional policies promote multilingualism and cultural diversity in higher education. So this was our main concern, because as you could see in the Red Polidiversa, we aim to promote this multilingualism, but we were not sure how much we were really promoting this multilingualism in institutions. So for this, we designed a qualitative study in which we used institutional documents, and we classified those documents into two types. First, what we call language policies, and these are documents that explicitly talk about language. And we also wanted to include those documents that, although they not refer to languages explicitly, they affect languages in universities. So we collected documents from 5 universities, We also conducted interviews. These were individual and group interviews with administrators and teachers from the same 5 universities. And here in this interview, there were 8 participants. And then we decided to enrich our analysis, conducting some surveys. So we did an online survey. 16 universities participated in this survey, and we got 22 responses. For the analysis, we used thematic analysis and also descriptive statistics for the answers in the survey. So now, what did we find in our study? Well, I'm going to focus on 3 main themes. This is the first one. We call it la persistencia, la hegemonía del inglés. No, so the persistence of English hegemony. And this means that what we found in our study was that despite the fact that we are all concerned about multilingualism in our institutions, there's still this myth that English is the only language or the main language that is needed in academia, in higher education. So, of course, there have been some changes in our institutions, but this narrative still prevails. So this means that the concept of bilingualism in some universities is still associated only with English. This was, of course, not surprising. We have seen this in other studies at different levels of education too. And we also identify that this trend, this narrative is, of course, influenced by external agents. In our case, el Ministerio de Educación Nacional, the Ministry of Education, and the Bilingual Colombia program, which focuses on English, has been focusing on English for at least 2 decades now. And also el Consejo de Europa, the European Council, through the Common European Framework of Reference. So the second main finding that we have was the invisibilities that we identify in the institutional policy. And we saw that there was this silencing of identities in our institutions. Most of them, of our students, don't seem to be very important in, for example, the creation of institutional policies, but also, and of course, as a consequence of this, their needs, especially communicativeness, learning needs, are being ignored in our practices in the institution. And the third finding, which is it's better for us because this is what really we wanted to see, was this group of initiatives that we have within this group of universities in which they are defying, they are challenging this narrative of English only in universities. So we could see that universities are expanding the repertoire of languages in different processes, not only in education, like they're not offering English only, but also Colombian Sign Language, for example, some indigenous languages, depending on the region. So we choose different languages to teach, but also some universities are acknowledging indigenous languages as the first language and Spanish as a second language. And these are just some examples. There's been also this open discussion of, that challenges the narrative of English as a need in higher education. Some institutions, they are inviting students to study other languages, depending, for example, on the region that they're going to be exercising the program, their career, but also on their own interest and also on the nature of the program. This is very interesting. There are some institutions that also have been promoting multilingualism through explicit institutional language policies. So we found some institutions that have already sanctioned their multilingual policies, and they call them either multilingual or plurilingual. And there are other institutions that are in this process of either creating their policies or sanctioning their policies. And also, this is just another example, the translation services have also been increasing in the universities, not only inside the university, but also they're offering this translation outside. So these are the three main findings. I have been trying to be very short in this, but of course, if you read the article, you will find more information. So some conclusions about our studies, and I wanted to bring only two, but we have some more. The first one is that what we could identify is that sometimes when we think of language policies, we think only on education, language education. But we saw that these policies are kind of they go through the different processes. So for example, we notice this in the admission processes, in the recruiting processes of new teachers, for example, of course, for graduation, in postgraduate studies, so in internationalization of universities, in publishing. So there are different areas in which these policies which they affect different processes at the university. And also that the second conclusion, big conclusion of the study, is that despite the fact that some universities are aiming to foster multilingualism, there is still this narrative of English, foreign languages, and English like the main language to learn and to use in the universities. So this is all for now. So we are open here for questions. And thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Norbelia. It's really interesting how this movement is happening in so different countries and different universities. It would be great to compare what is happening in Colombia in this aspect to what is happening in other countries. So now we have the debate. Dr. José Marín.
Juan José.
Juan José Marín, por favor.
Well, first of all, good morning, dear all. First of all, I really want to thank you for presenting this article to us. I really believe everything was presented in a very thorough and comprehensive way. And the situation described is truly of great importance to everybody because it really presents one of the main reasons why the world of academia is seen as such a lopsided place where opportunities are not equal, right? And identifying these issues are the very first step towards a better future. So, in order to further discuss this topic, I will present you with a question. This question is not meant to be answered in a very definitive way. It's more so to, as I said, to further discuss the topic, to hear some thoughts on the matter. So basically, while reading the article, I found myself agreeing with pretty much everything that was presented because my own views on language adhere perfectly with what was presented. But that got me thinking, how could we make this argument resonate with people whose views on language are different, or maybe an institution? Because as we know, the reason why English is seen as this de facto language to be learned is for practical reasons. It's because it's seen as the language that opens up opportunities, that provides visibility. So it's seen as the only language worth learning instead of, seeing the inherent worth of all languages. So when addressing an individual or an institution who has these views on language, how can we highlight the value of these other languages? I don't mean this necessarily on a practical level per se, because this could help to validate this idea that a language needs to be practical in order to be worth something. So, in other words, how can we still push for inclusivity in this environment that is so centered on practicality?
Okay. I'm going to participate, but maybe Jaime also wants to say something. I would say that this is one of the most difficult things to do in policies when we are in this field of policies, because of the same narrative, right? That English is good for all. Doesn't matter who this person is. So I would say there is no one straight answer to that, but I would say that we have to keep on showing the great diversity we have, and also showing not only that, but that when we are silencing a language, we're also silencing an identity. We're silencing people. So when we say that, for example, Nasayub is not important, what we are really saying is that these people that speak Nasayub are not important. And I think that's the main thing to address here. There are other things like, for example, demonstrating through research that English does not really give an advantage to everyone, that it depends on who you are, where you live, what's your field of study, but we have to demonstrate that through research. No, so this narrative that English for all, that it will benefit all, yes, it does benefit people, but not all of them, not in the same circumstances, right? So that's what I want to say, but I also want to emphasize that this is one of the most difficult things to address. What you have to.
Yes. Some more questions? Dr. Juan Jose?
Gilvan, I think maybe Jaime was going to say something.
I don't know. I'm just thinking that Juan Jose is asking a very difficult question. In fact, I was chatting while Norvegia was presenting. I was chatting with Luanda because in the university, in the School of Languages, we are trying to put all these ideas into practice, and putting this into practice is really challenging because then you have to deal with structures in the university, you have to deal with policies that are established and have been established for decades. We have to deal with colleagues who are English teachers who have had all the power in the school for many years. You have to deal with resources because multilingualism is very expensive as compared to English. At least that is our case. It's more difficult to have sign language than just English courses. So you have to deal with many things. So the challenge now is how to move from what we think and what we write about, how to put that into practice. It's a whole adventure full of challenges, achievements, but many times efforts that you cannot take to the end, but you just have to start moving, and we'll get there someday when we will have universities very multilingual, but we have to work really hard. So the challenge now is how to put this into practice. Jose, this is a really difficult question, and I hope that when I retire, you get to be the dean of the School of Languages and you continue the work that we are doing, because this will take decades of work.
So I hope it will not take decades, Professor Jaime, that we will be able to implement it in few years. Okay, can we go to the next author? I have the pleasure to call Dr. Anthony Hoyt West, independent scholar, and we are going to have a presentation on language policies toward Spanish in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Philippines, an exploratory study. You have the floor, Dr. Anthony Hoyte West.
Muito obrigado, muchas gracias. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction, Gilvan, and also very grateful to Luanda, to Uma, and to Marta as well for all the work together on the special issue. So without further ado, I will get started. Let me just share my screen. 1 second. Hopefully you can all see it now. Do you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to speak in English, obviously, but the title, of course, in Spanish, and is Políticas Lingüísticas para la Promoción del Español en Trinidad y Tobago y las Filipinas, un estudio exploratorio. E em português, com sotaque de Portugal, Políticas Linguísticas para o Espanhol em Trinidad e Tobago e nas Filipinas, um estudo exploratório. So, okay. First of all, just some introductory remarks. Trinidad and Tobago at first, and the Philippines at first thought maybe it seems like an unusual comparison. Of course, these are island nations, but with very different geographies, located in different continents, very different in terms of geographical area, in terms of the size of the population, and very different histories as well. But one thing in common that they have is both nations have a rich diversity of different ethnicities, cultures, religions, and so on. Another important shared factor is this experience of what I call double colonization. Firstly, by Spain, in the case of both countries, so from the late 14th, 15th century onwards. For Trinidad, it lasted until 1797, Tobago to 1802. So at the end of the 18th century, more or less, Spanish colonization lasted. For the Philippines, it lasted much longer, until the end of the 19th century, 1898. Then there was a subsequent colonization by major English-speaking powers. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, it was the United Kingdom. So Trinidad and Tobago was a British colony up until 1962. For the Philippines, it was the United States of America, and that lasted until just after World War II, until 1946. And now both nations are independent republics. And of course, over the centuries, Spanish lost the former status it had had in Spanish colonial times. Of course, the rule by major English-speaking powers meant there was the dominance of English. Just became the official language of both nations, alongside Tagalog in the Philippines, of course. Multilingualism, of course, was also very much present still in the Philippine context and also in the Trinidad and Tobago context as well. For example, in the past in Trinidad, French Creole, Portuguese, even Hindi was spoken quite widely. Nowadays, it's mostly English and a English-based Creole. However, in both nations, there has been a common push towards rediscovering this kind of Spanish linguistic heritage. So greater prominence has been accorded to Spanish in the education system of both countries. This started around about 20 years ago, 2005. There was the SAFL, Spanish as the First Foreign Language policy in Trinidad and Tobago. 2008 in the Philippines, there was a special government decree that was passed, and then other official memoranda followed it to promote the role of Spanish. Now, in terms of a native speaking population, it's very, very small. In both nations, just around 4,000 people are estimated to be native speakers of the language, according to the Instituto de Cervantes studies from 2023. However, a larger number have some competence in the language, 66,000 in Trinidad and Tobago, almost 500,000 in the Philippines. So the aim of the article, as you can see, I've highlighted it there, was basically to evaluate and contextualize some of the similarities, some of the differences relating to the current position of Spanish in education, both at school and university, using a novel theoretical framework. And this was a framework that I chose by Michele Gazzola and colleagues, basically advanced in the first chapter of the Routledge Handbook of Language Policy and Planning, which appeared a couple of years ago. And they developed a cyclical 5-stage model. The first stage is an emergence of a given language policy issue, so general awareness of it on the agenda. The second level is the recognition, and then the language policy issue being placed on the so-called political agenda, so open to debate on the policy initiative. The third stage relates to the formulation and the adoption of the policy, as well as locating it in the broader context. The penultimate stage, the fourth stage, involves the implementation of language policy, as well as the creation of dedicated institutions and an administrative structure to support it. And finally, the final stage is an evaluation of the policy as a whole, as well as its effects on wider society. So I basically wanted to analyze these policy stages with regard to Spanish in Trinidad and Tobago and the Philippines. Now, it's quite interesting for me because I'm Trinidadian as well as British, so Trinidad has been the focus of many of my previous studies. The Philippines, however, was something new for me, was a new, a real chance to engage with different literature, different cultural, linguistic, and geographical context. It was desk-based, my study, exploratory, as the title suggests, qualitative, and involved the analysis of different policy documents, media sources, as well as academic literature. Okay, so in accordance with the 5 stages of the model, the first stage, emergence. So in the Philippines, after 1898, Spanish did survive. There was the creation of different initiatives, such as the Philippine Academy of the Spanish Language in the 1920s. There were also attempts under American jurisdiction to make Spanish an optional school subject, and this has continued. And importantly, one aspect was that Spanish continued to be spoken by a portion of the intellectual elite. Different cultural associations, as I've listed on this slide, Asociación Cultural Galeón de Manila. These were created to encourage use of Spanish. There was also a specific literary prize, the Premio Zobel, to recognize literary production in Spanish. So that Spanish remains somewhat visible, even though it was no longer an official language. In Trinidad, however, Spanish was quite a peripheral language even before British rule. I haven't really got time to go into the history here, but for various reasons, French Creole were also dominant during later Spanish times and into the 19th century and so on. So there was really kind of, it was quite well known for its multilingualism. Thus, Spanish remained somewhat, as I've mentioned, peripheral. There was no really kind of intellectual parallel as in the Philippines. So the idea of bringing back Spanish came at the beginning of the current century, the 21st. And this was motivated by economic reasons. To broaden trade with Latin America, of course, Venezuela is just less than 10 kilometers away at the closest point. So the South American continent is very, very close. There were also mooted plans for a Pan-American free trade area with its capital in Trinidad. This didn't come to pass, but nonetheless, these were strongly economic motives to promote the use of Spanish. The second stage of the model is the recognition and placement of the question on the political agenda. So in Trinidad, you had this the Spanish as the first foreign language policy, SAFL. It was promoted by a special institution, the Secretariat for the Implementation of Spanish. You can see the logo on the right-hand side. And this was part of a development plan that aimed to increase the level of economic development in Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, it's a very resource-rich country. And the idea was to really kind of advance the country to be at the level of developed country by 2020. In the Philippines, however, there was the question more of links with Spain, deepening these links between the Philippines and Spain. Spain itself had a foreign policy shift more towards Asia, so interest in geopolitics and so on. And as part of that, numerous agreements were signed between the Philippines and Spain to help bolster really the status, the role of Spanish, and to have greater recognition of it in educational life. Stage 3, policy formulation and adoption. As I've mentioned, this institution in Trinidad, the Secretariat, aimed to, quote, create a new learning environment for which the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago will learn and effectively utilize Spanish as the first foreign language by the year 2020. And this institution, the SIS, formalized links with different schools, universities, government departments, private sector as well, in order to help promote the language. In the Philippines, it was much more similar to kind of language and education schemes. These were the main focus. There was a general move towards mother tongue-based multilingual education. Of course, the Philippines still remains highly multilingual with a lot of different languages spoken. An important facet of this was a special program in foreign languages. And in fact, Spanish was the first language offered in this scheme. As I've mentioned, there were also different memoranda at the governmental level to help promote Spanish in schools and universities. Moving to the fourth stage, the implementation of the language policy and how it was monitored. In Trinidad and Tobago, this secretariat was responsible for a wide range of things, not only for Spanish language courses, but also for training teachers to use Spanish in the classroom, training civil servants to improve their proficiency, as well as to organize cultural activities. In addition, Spanish is taught at universities and colleges throughout the country, both for degrees and as well as optional courses. In the Philippines, as I've mentioned, there was this special program in foreign languages. So schools offering Spanish are available in 16 out of the 17 regions in the country. There are, of course, manifold possibilities to study a language at university, and different schemes such as scholarships to encourage students from the Philippines to study abroad in Spain for postgraduate degrees. Moving on to the final stage, because I'm aware I'm running out of time, the evaluation of the public policy and its effects. So both countries, it's fair to say that increasing the level of proficiency in Spanish is generally seen as something in a work in progress. It's been going on for 20 years, and we heard in the question, the comment on the previous presentation, I think it was Jaime who mentioned that these multilingual procedures often take years and years, and thus it's even the 20 years has passed, still taking time to bear fruit. Now, another interesting aspect, of course, which these policies maybe could not have anticipated at the time they were founded, is the geopolitical aspect. In Trinidad and Tobago, there has been quite a high level of immigration from Venezuela in recent years. So that, of course, has affected the visibility and the usage of the language. In the Philippines, however, the focus has been mostly on pedagogical aspects. For example, ensuring that there's enough resources, that there's enough personnel in order to implement Spanish language tuition in schools and universities. So just some brief conclusions. In historical context, Spanish remained much more visible in the Philippines than in Trinidad, despite, during these kind of years of, the dominance of the English language. It retained in the Philippines much more cultural vitality than in Trinidad. The return, or rather the kind of, yes, basically the decision underpinning the economic policy in Trinidad, Spanish as a first language policy in Trinidad was primarily economic. In the Philippines, it was rather closer ties with Spain. These policies were created, as the SAFL in Trinidad and different memoranda in the Philippines, implemented by the Secretariat for the Implementation of Spanish in Trinidad and Tobago, and via the things like the Special Program for Foreign Language in the Philippines. And both nations also deepened links with Spain. I forgot to mention that, in fact, in the early years of the 21st century, both nations, in fact, had royal visits from Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia. So this is a very visible kind of step in cultural diplomacy as well for strengthening links with Spain. And of course, as we all know, there's a changing geopolitical and trade environment that seems to be changing every day. It's, of course, evolving due to not only domestic factors, but also the international stage as well. I also wanted to point out some brief avenues for further research. I myself am a translator and conference interpreter, so of course, I'll be very interested in looking to the role of translation in language and multilingual policies, not only in Trinidad and Tobago and the Philippines, but also elsewhere as well. As I mentioned, this was a desk-based study, so of course this has naturally some limitations. It would be very useful in the future to interview different stakeholders or conduct questionnaires, surveys, and so on, different policymakers to gain more insights on the ground. And lastly, this novel theoretical framework from Gazzola and colleagues, it definitely really has the potential to be applied to many other multilingual situations, multilingual contexts, and case studies. So these were just some concluding reflections that I had. Some references from the presentation here. So just all remains to say thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado, digo eu. Muito obrigado. Thank you. Very interesting how these countries are trying to activate their historical heritage, or we can call memory languages, to implement multilingualism and a new position in geopolitics. Yeah. That can be a very fruitful research line for the future. Thank you. I give the floor to our colleague, Professor Yao Gana from Ivory Coast. Welcome.
Merci, professeur Gilvan, pour l'invitation qui m'a été faite. Merci à professeur Martin. J'espère que vous m'entendez. Hein? Vous m'entendez? Tout le monde m'entend?
Parfait, parfait.
Oui, parfait. Oui.
Alors, très bien. I would like to thank Anthony for his presentation. I know it can be tricky to present in just 10 minutes or 15 minutes, such a huge job that has been done. And congratulations before I start. I've been reading your text, and at some point, because then I'm speaking from that global south, we want to extend it. And sometime I was disagreeing with some of your points, and I said this is all about research. Research is to provoke sometime the reader's interest to what is being said. But setting the point, I'm just thinking louder, you see, just for the sake of viewers. Do you mind telling us who are the key actors instilling the appraisal of the Spanish language and its related memories in Trinidad and Tobago and the Philippines, and why? Why am I saying it? We know from history that those places were already occupied by people. And when I read your job, I see you focus on Spanish, which is good. But in the process of building or recalling memories, I think some memories need to be called upon. And then from your standpoint, how would you say the countries which, like Tobago and Philippines, have been received in the Spanish-speaking world, if we may consider that they are returning somewhat to what we could call a memory that was being drowned? And did this move alter to a certain point the rapport that they have with their former colonizers? Because I know knowledge is always a place where we are waging war. And when you win that war, then you will influence generations to come. So I would like to just ponder some questions, then give you the floor for you to, depending on your organization, to see what is pertinent, what is relevant to you, for you to respond. So what is your sentiment, your personal sentiment about about that, the return to Spanish language as a system which at a certain time was to control, when we know that those recalling Spanish language are willing to control their destiny? I don't know if my question is being clear. And if you were part of this team that was supposed to craft those policies, which aspect would you stress on in this process? And now I would like to ask questions because I'm more interested in what can serve in reconciling the Spanish-speaking world, which is the mediation that will create. So the article highlighted that SAFLL was designed to revitalize the language for economic and commercial purposes. Then how is that dynamic taking into account the knowledge economy? How is knowledge managed in that process? And how did the emergence of that passion for Spanish language impact or help thrive both translation and interpretation sector or market in these two countries? Because when you go back to that memory, then you will be compelling people to deal with something new. So there is, to some extent, a need for mediation or intermediation. And just to finish, then this is a provocation I want to make now. Thinking from the global South perspective, to which extent does such a return to Spanish enable freedom? Can you free yourself from, let me give just an image, from a jail and rush to another? Because I would have been interested in process to see how indigenous languages have been key even to save Spanish memories. Because in Cote d'Ivoire, when you look at local languages, you may find some Portuguese expressions in those languages. So our local languages have been key in preserving the Portuguese memory in Cote d'Ivoire. That's why I said it would be very interesting to see how indigenous languages have been key. So let me stop here and let you wrap up interrogations.
That's great. Thanks very much for your questions and comments. The reception wasn't so good, so I couldn't always hear everything, but I hope I managed to get the key points. So I think the first thing you mentioned was more about this kind of the kind of memory of the different languages, and I think I'll speak mostly about Trinidad and Tobago because that's what I'm most familiar with from my previous studies and origins as well. As I mentioned, these were in the 19th century up into the early 20th century, it was a highly multilingual society with Spanish, French Creole, French, Hindi, also other languages as well, such as Portuguese, well, alongside English as well. I focus mostly on Spanish because, in the interest of length, I would also have liked to have looked at the status of minority languages or maybe minoritized languages, such as the Creole spoken now in Trinidad and in Tobago, which doesn't have any official status. I mean, this is something we find really across the Caribbean, except from in Haiti. But in the English-speaking Caribbean, English is the only official language of those different nation states. So even though there are Creoles that are widely spoken, there is no recognition of it really in public life. Efforts are being made in Jamaica, for example. They have a Jamaican Creole unit at the University of the West Indies at Mona. But yeah, this is a very, very important point. So it was really in the interests of brevity and focus that I decided to look mostly at the Spanish influence. I chose the comparison with the Philippines basically because I had read about it and I couldn't find any existing literature which had sought to contrast this situation, which kind of segues into the second question about how it's received in the Spanish-speaking world. About when the King and Queen of Spain visited Trinidad and Tobago, I think it was around about 2008, 2009, if memory serves. There were a number of articles in the Spanish media that were maybe not so favorable, saying that there was this initiative to promote Spanish in Trinidad and Tobago, but it wasn't really proving to be that successful. Of course, the initiative was then quite new. Spanish was very much a historical language, very much spoken by a minority. Nowadays, of course, as I've mentioned, the geopolitical aspect, primarily encouraged by migration from Venezuela. Spanish is much more prominent in public life. When I was in Trinidad a couple of years ago, I was surprised, for example, to hear an advert in Spanish on the radio, which I'd never heard before my previous visits. And also when you're out and about in shops, in places, and so on and so forth, there is a much more audible presence of the language. Current studies are being done at the University of the West Indies on the growing presence of Spanish in the linguistic landscape in the Trinidad and Tobago context, and so on and so forth, as well as the role, of course, translation, interpreting, which I think was what you mentioned in your third question. Yes, this is something that, of course, is very important to create the real need situations of bilingualism, multilingualism as well. It also, of course, remains, you mentioned also talking about the knowledge economy, technological advances, the role of AI. What did AI have to play in this? Where, how are things changing? I think it's really a question for us all as linguists, professionals interested and working with languages, is how is this going to impact us all? How is it going to impact different language policies as well? And how not only majority languages, but also minority languages, the different opportunities, different challenges that it can pose. You asked about I think if I got you correctly, about what would I do if I was involved in these institutions? It's a very interesting question. I mean, again, referring to Jaime's comment on UdeA's presentation, these things take years. We cannot just flick a switch and then suddenly, everybody is magically fluent. It takes, it's not only the question of having the materials, but also changing different outlooks on the language, questions about, of course, Spanish, it's an international language. What kind of Spanish should be taught? Should it be Spanish from Latin America? Should it be Spanish from Spain, and so on and so forth? Should it be Spanish? These are big questions, important questions as well. all of these aspects really, if I think, it requires obviously the government input, but also the input of society and also the input of culture as well. For example, are programs in Spanish, dubbed or translated or whatever, featured on television or on, for example, are there newspaper columns, these kind of things. These are all different aspects as well that could be considered. I found it very interesting using the framework, the policy framework, because as with any framework, it has its the things that are required to conform to it, for example. And it was quite a useful lens for the purpose of this article, but it also provides some extra scope for further research. So I hope this answers your questions.
Thank you, colleagues. Very interesting. Now we jump to East Asia. I invite Professor Júlio Reis Jatobá to present his article on the perspectives and trends in foreign language policies in China, especially the case of Portuguese. Júlio Jatobá, please, you have the floor. We are not hearing you yet.
You listen me now?
Now, yes.
Okay. I could not miss this opportunity to congratulate Escuela and the whole editorial team. Just some words. For that people that are outside from the publication process, they may have no idea of the care, dedication, and professionalism of the editors. And in a world that money talks, is very rare journal like that, a very high quality process and high quality articles be free. So I will speak like just one sentence in Spanish. A la Universidad de Antioquia, las editoras y todo el equipo editorial, muchísimas gracias por todo lo que hacen por una ciencia inclusiva y accesible. ICLA es un espacio de resistencia. Viva Colombia, viva Sudamérica, viva Latinoamérica. Well, so now with these words, I will start my study. Sorry. Okay. First, the end of the study brings a literature review about language policies in China, focusing in less commonly taught languages, in special the Portuguese, and how China geopolitical strategies is leading the role in the South-South cooperation. My question is, how do China's language policy reflects and support its global ambitions? Well, I collected like 127 materials, not only academic, but also like laws and provincial law, national laws, many documents important in China. And I choose like a methodology that brings like a multilingual perspective, because I used materials originally in Chinese, also in Portuguese, English, and also in Spanish to make like a puzzle about the challenges about for China language policy. So let's talk about the historical context of like language policy in China. It's very complex to talk about language policy in China, because when you think about language policy, you think about like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, or even like 500 years, like one state, one language, the grammars, the 1492 Nebrija, like something like this. But when you're talking about China, you're talking about language policies and the concept about language policy from almost 3,000 years ago. Lao Tzu, one of the major philosophers in ancient China, they talk about language policy, not with the word language policy. So the China as a state, China as a national, how to say, like a civilizational country, they are speaking about concepts about language policy from 3,000 years ago. So my concentration in this article, of course, is like China nowadays. So I collect since 198 the documents. Why 198? Because that was 4 years after the end of the Cultural Revolution, and it was when China began restart to talk about Western languages. Why Western language? Because during the Cultural Revolution, China was, of course, dealing with other language, but like regional languages. So let's go to nowadays. BRI. This is like Belt and Road Initiative. What is the Belt and Road Initiative? Belt and Road Initiative is still like a language initiative to connect, like make a network between countries. The network construct a world infrastructure to dealing with the cultural difference, but also, more important, the economy. Is like to connect the global South. That's the main question, like, how can you be like a global network without a language or a language policy? Language is a key. If you look like US like global dialogue, that's not dialogue, it's like imposition. So it's amazing how China can build like 1,000 miles of railways and connections without one shot. So how they build this strategy? This strategy is very simple. They have a very central policy, and they have a very central language policy. They have 2 language policies. They have like language policy inside China, from China, and language policy to China go abroad, and also from abroad come to China. So this came like the concept, the BRI in 2013 was the first time the government talked about the word talent. So that's a very challenge. What's meaning talent in language? From the Portuguese perspective, talent is something that you burn. That is like from yourself, you cannot train it. But the Chinese perspective, talent or linguistic talent is qualified, trained people that learn a language with a very clear purpose, very clear objective. Why do they speak like they start to train in Portuguese or studying Portuguese at the university? Very easy to learn a way to connect the Portuguese-speaking countries. So let's talk about very brief about the Portuguese in China. In China, in 2003, there was just only 3 universities that teach Portuguese. But in my presentation today, I'm not talking about Macau, just mainland China. Mainland China, they have 3 universities. But how about now? Sorry, it's very small, but this data is from 2022. In 2022, there was 53 universities teaching Portuguese as a second language. If you take like in 20 years, you built an infrastructure, like change the university curricula to teach language, like it's amazing. How it's possible? Like in just 20 years, if you take the case of Brazil, in 2003, I think there was only 1 university that teach Chinese as foreign language Brazil, USP, Universidade de São Paulo, São Paulo University. And now, 2006, there is still just 1 university in Brazil that teach Chinese. That's like, it's not like, the people want to learn Portuguese, that's a strategy. This data actually from Gilvan, thank you, Gilvan, this data from Gilvan, talk about like how China look for the future. That's like the difference that I will speak about, like three countries that I study a lot: US, Russia, and China. China and Russia, they have like language policy as a long-term strategy. So when China is investing in Portuguese, they are not just looking for the market in 2 or 4 years. They are looking like 2000, they're looking 100 years ahead. That's why the Portuguese is very relevant in China. So let's talk about some tendencies in Portuguese. Like the first one, that actually they are not like many studies, but for less common language China, they have like, they are serving to two purposes. The first one's for national purposes, like the global strategy of China. Second, of course, the market. So how about Portuguese? Are you talking like the last slide? So I would like to talk also about the multilingualism in China. How works the multilingualism in China, and how they work in the South cooperation. The first thing is like China see like the multilingualism, the multilingualism, like the multipolarity of the world as positive way to increase like the partnership between many countries. So China is using multilingualism like even in Africa. That's very interesting. Like in Angola and also in Mozambique, that places that speaks Portuguese as official language, there are companies that are training people in local language, like Chinese companies. So they see multilingualism like as something that they should consider when they are investing in other country. So let's talk about some results that I want to talk today. How the Chinese experience may help us to understand like China, how China is playing like leadership in the South-South cooperation. You can find this in my article. What is important, because this is like systematization, how language policies works in China, and how China see like minority language. I changed the name because like many materials in Chinese, they use the name minority language. Portuguese is like minority language, but I use like less common taught language, because minority language, like Portuguese, is a language speak like for many people, many like more than 200 million in the world, but it's minority in China. And something that I think is very interesting. Let's think about Macau. Macau, I don't know if all the people know about the history of Macau, but one of the official languages in Macau is Portuguese. And there is no discussion that Macau is China. So I support the thesis that if Macau used Portuguese as official language, China has also Portuguese as official language. So that's why that you can discuss like the position of Macau or how Portuguese is important to China. It's not about only history. It's like Portuguese can bring to China many advantages, like they can enter in Africa from west, and from the west, they can enter in China from Mozambique and from Angola. Portuguese allows China to enter in Europe from Portugal, and allows China to enter in South America. So Portuguese for global strategy for China, that's a language that gives like many opportunities to China. So let's jump to some conclusions. How geopolitics actors plays. So I bring like, it's not my original, I bring from political scientists. Like there are three kinds of countries, like the countries that play chess, countries that play qi, like is Chinese chess actually, and the places that plays poker. And he compares like Russia plays chess, China plays qi, and US plays poker. Why? Because when you play chess, when you play qi, you should have long-term strategy for language, long-term strategy military, long for all, you need to have like strategy. But when you play poker as Trump, actually you have no strategy. You're waiting the next card. So that's very interesting to see how China plays qi with language. So China is looking like 50 years, 100 years, not like next semester. So how many time I have, Juva? Because I still have some considerations.
It's your time is over.
Okay, sorry. But I still have some. We can use like maybe
We can discuss in the
Yeah.
questions. Thank you, Julio. The University of Macau, where Julio works, is a member of our UNESCO chair as well as Antioquia. So it's a pleasure to have these discussions here. I have two questions. I will be leading the debate. The first question. So you bring us the image that China appears to promote a language policy of cultivating talents, we would say capacities, in various less common languages. And that the objective is to meet geo-economic objectives. That is, it's overseas projects that must have translators, interpreters, guides in different languages, and so on. We know that China is a central planet economy, albeit with a large private sector, of course. My curiosity is how China organize or influence or determine the work of the universities in this project. So for promoting economy-driven multilingualism, China bring the universities or call the universities. Are the universities in this sense autonomous to propose policies, or they follow policies of the central government for promoting this kind of multilingualism?
Well, very good question, actually. It's very tricky. Because why is tricky? Because looks like all the Chinese universities like stated controlled, but that's not true. Actually, you should see like the level of the university, because in China they have like the national level universities, they have like provincial level, and they have like municipal level. And all these three universities, they have different curricula and different like strategies. So let's talk first about the centralized university, like the national level university. Usually the national level universities in China, they work very near the Chinese like strategy, like geopolitical strategy. Usually the national level universities is the university that you training diplomats, you training scholars, and you training people that you works like the Chinese like state level companies. So that national university is very aligned with geopolitical position, but the provincial and the municipal, they have much more freedom, and they are much more market oriented. So if you talk about the provincial, they have like many difference. So they can like, how to say, they can adapt the curriculum to the market or the local market. I will give like a very simple example. In China, they have the university that the name is Transportation Universities. It's very funny, because if you think like people, we are engineers, no, but they are studying language. Why they are studying language? Because they are studying language to help engineers that goes abroad to construct like, how to say, ferrovias? I forgot the name.
Railroads.
train roads in Africa and Brazil, and they will work. So this kind of university, they have like a very funny curricula. They have like 1+1 curricula. What mean 1+1? They have first language, second specialty. So if you see, they are market oriented, but they are also geopolitical orientated. And the municipal level, which is the lowest level, they are very free. They should look like training people that work in the local markets, the local factories. So you have three kinds of universities, and if you see all three kinds of universities works very, very near the central strategy, but also work in the economy.
Very
Marketing.
good. Very good. Thank you. That gives us a much more complex and interesting image of the situation. The second question, we know that that China has a system called a one country, two systems.
Okay.
That allowed regional differences, that allowed that Macau and Hong Kong keep English,
Autonomy.
Portuguese as official languages. They have their own currency, central banks. So China has more than one currency, not more than one language, not only more than one language. And that is why Portuguese has this preeminent situation in Macau till 2049. We know that in this year, Portuguese will be not more official language after 2049. I would say, would you say that Macau holds a key role in these policies, language policies of China for the foreign projects? Or on the contrary, you would say that Macau's role is becoming less central as Portuguese is increasingly promoted through other channels and for purposes that no longer rely on these heavily historical ties between China and Portugal, for example.
Okay, first, Gilvan, I don't think like after 2049, Portuguese will be not the official language. I strongly believe that they will maintain Portuguese as official language. That's my bet. Why? Because like it's like structurally speaking, it's very convenient. So let me try to make a picture of Macau. First, Macau is an island in two ways. Geographically speaking and metaphorically speaking, Macau is a laboratory, politically and linguistically speaking. Macau is very small. When you're talking about China, you think like very big country, but Macau like is like very small. Very small. But Macau is fascinating example how multilingualism and language can be managed because Macau is so complex. Why so complex? They have two official languages in Macau, Chinese and Portuguese. But it's very funny because when you think, what is Chinese? Because like the common law, the constitution of mainland China, the People's Republic of China, the constitution says the official language is Chinese, and Chinese is Mandarin based on the accent of Beijing and blah, blah, blah. This is official. But the Macau basic law just talk like Chinese, but Chinese can be any Chinese language. Chinese can be Cantonese. Actually, 8% of the population, the mother tongue is not Mandarin. It's Cantonese. Macau is an immigration place. The second language spoken by native speakers in Macau is not Chinese, it's Tagalog. Tagalog from Philippines. And also Bahasa Indonesia. But they have also Bahasa Malaysia. They have Thai. They have many, many different languages. But what is happening in Macau that the lingua franca is English because they have like people from all the places of the world, but Portuguese remains as official language. Why? That's the question. Why? They have many reasons. The first one, to maintain the historical ties in Portuguese countries. And the second, Macau has no economy. Of course, Macau has economy like casino, gambling. But that's not real economy. They have no product. So If Macau maintain the Portuguese is a way to be connected with Brazil, but not only Brazil, like Africa, not only Africa as a whole, like Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa, like Palop, like Angola, Mozambique, as your data shows, Yuvan, like in 100 years, the biggest population of Portuguese will be where? In Angola and Mozambique. So it's very convenient. And also Macau have like a very, very important role in China. Why? Data shows that 70% of the Portuguese teachers in universities in China that works in China, I mean like Chinese teachers that works in Chinese universities, they got the master or the PhD in Macau. So Macau is like Asia center for training Portuguese. Like there are people who came from Thailand to learn Portuguese here. Are people came from Philippines? Are people came from Malaysia from here? Just one data. Outside Brazil and outside Portugal, Macau, like my university, has the biggest department outside Brazil, Portuguese department outside Brazil and outside Portugal. There are 33 full-time teachers. Even in Angola, they don't have a department that has like 33 full-time Portuguese teachers. So Macau is like a hub to connect China and the Portuguese-speaking countries. So Gilvan, I don't think like 2009 that it will be not more official. I think be stronger.
That is a good perspective, Julie. So thank you very much. We understand that the response is positive. So Macau will continue having this important
that's my bet.
Role.
But in Macau, you must
very much. Okay. So we come to the end of our presentation for today. Thank you very much for everyone. We can see in these three contributions that multilingualism is not something from the nature, but is built by people, by institutions, by countries through language policies. That is exactly the connection we wanted to do with the publication and with our UNESCO chair. And the review has the journal has so many interesting articles that bring this perspective. And I want to thank one more time to Icala, to Professor Luanda, to Professor Marta, to Professor Jaime, and announce that we are going to have our diploma on language policies for multilingualism beginning in October 10th. So you are all invited to be with us in the new project of the UNESCO chair. Thank you very much. Good day. Till next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Can I add something?
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so of course it was wonderful. Thank you, Gilwan, for taking the full responsibility on you for moderating it very nicely. Since the panel coordinators wanted us to also give the key takeaways, Gilwan already pointed out about the policies. The basic idea I wanted to just add to here is in each of these three presentations, the core argument, for example, in the Colombian paper on multilingualism in higher education, we saw that the English-Spanish bilingualism reinforces linguistic hierarchies, and in some cases, even it sidelines indigenous languages. The paper advocates for inclusive multilingual models that recognize and support students' full linguistic repertoires, including the indigenous languages. And language policies affect different areas, right from admission process to internationalization of universities. It was pointed out that only some universities practice multilingualism while others are still taking more time. I think that is the same case all over the world. In the second paper by Anthony Hoyte-West, we saw how Spanish language policies are being carried out or implemented in two post-colonial nations. The key insight, in my opinion, is language policy is cyclical. It's shaped by geopolitical interests and national identity. The takeaway is it's the paper suggests that examining such cycles can help develop responsive and context sensitive language policies. It of course it calls for a broader relevance, expanding this comparative model to other post-colonial contexts such as Southeast Asia. Maybe we can look into Caribbean and many others. In Julia's paper, which was discussed at length by Jilwan, we see that there is a disconnect between constitutional guarantees and real world practices. Uh, Even though the policy is mainly to promote Portuguese, but in the shape of minority language, because I come from a country where we do have situations like that. In one language, in one state a language can be official, but in some other state it can be minority. It is not being official. But in Macau, even though Portuguese is official, we do see that there is a rights based approach to language policy grounded in different social linguistic realities. I just wanted to conclude by summarizing these three papers by saying that in our panel, all the three, they bring powerful grounded insights in how language policies are playing out across different parts of the global south, whether it is the Colombia's higher education system or Hoyte West comparative study on two Spanish dominant colonial languages which have come back in both countries, how they are shaped by geopolitics and how they are shifting national identities. The same is happening with China, the mainland China, where the constitutional recognition of languages are different, but when it comes to real world, the implementation is different. So these contributions, I feel, it challenges us to rethink language policy through a more inclusive, decolonial, and socially just lens. I thank you once again for giving us the opportunity to co-edit this volume. Looking forward for more and more discussions on this. Thank you, Martha Luzia and Luando Sito and Jilwan and all the presenters. Wonderful job. Thank you.
Thanks to everybody. Obrigada. Muito obrigada. See you soon.
Fazemos uma foto final. Let's make a picture, final photo. Please open your cams. Everyone. Yes, Natalia, Laura. We are not hearing you, Jaime. Okay.